Simplicity and maintainability successfully coexist under the hood with the most budget-friendly execution of all elements. Wherever 10 euro cents could be saved, they were saved. For the owner, this means that all sorts of small elements, from clamps to plastic tanks, are not made very well. They are secured with whatever they can find. And literally after the first 3 or 4 years of operation of the machine, many parts do not look very good and will not survive any service intervention. In general, the engine compartment reacts very sensitively to dirt, moisture, long downtime, and careless hands, increasing the time and cost of repairs. In winter, radiator caps are an indispensable attribute of Duster in cold regions. Cardboard is 2 Ziegler style, so whole special kits are produced for it to block holes in the bumper for the winter. For a diesel engine, this is almost a mandatory option, but for a 1.6 petrol engine it is very desirable. A very weak exhaust system has been present since the car was literally 5 years old. Rotten exhaust supports and corrugations are part of everyday life for the owners. Indirectly, the condition of the exhaust will help you understand what mileage the car has and how intensively it was used. So, for those who like to drive on the highway, the front part of the track gets badly burned and does not last long. Well, those who like to anneal on dirt roads and jump through pits almost always have breakdowns of the exhaust mounting points. Whatever engine is under the hood of the Duster, it is reliable enough for the owner to put up with any minor vagaries of the car. Even later 1.6 engines with 114 horsepower, with the H4M index, despite the resulting oily appetite, they are relatively unpretentious. And the old cast-iron K4M with 1.6 liters and 102 horsepower, and a 2-liter F4R with 135 to 142 horsepower. Just examples of ideally foolproof products with a high resource. Hey buddy, looking for a used car? You should pay attention to the site Carmi.pro. Carmi.pro is huge catalog of cars, engines, gearboxes, and the best part is, you can find out about breakdowns of any part of any car, absolutely free. Go on Carmi.pro and be aware of all possible malfunctions. Carmi.pro. The list of their main problems will fit in a few lines. The K4M and F4R engines have a rather capricious map, absolute pressure sensor. It does not have a specific resource, it just often turns out that it is to blame for strange bucking or loss of traction. And it is not recommended to install cheap analogs. You can get an exemplary complex case of searching for a floating fault. Coils also don't last long, especially if they are flooded with water from above. On restyled F4R engines, the phase regulator valves require regular monitoring, especially if you change the oil every 15,000. And for a long journey it is better to have a couple of spare ones. Phase regulators in general have a moderate service life on all motors where they are present. After 60,000 mileage, they may tap when starting, and after 120,000 mileage, you can get leaks in the oil seal or constant overtones from the phasic when changing engine operating modes. On the new H4M engine, the first lambda sensor and catalytic collector do not last long, especially if you rarely change spark plugs and often drive at high speeds. And in general, the catalyst fails easily and naturally. You need to keep an eye on it. If it starts to gather dust, then the risk of rapid occurrence of scuffing of the piston group becomes maximum. Inlet leaks on all engines are the rule rather than the exception, and this is the fault not only of high mileage and poor maintenance, but also of a cheap design with a bunch of points where O-rings are used. Leaks of oil seals and covers with such a simple VCG, crankcase ventilation, system are also a widespread phenomenon, and it is difficult to find a dry engine with a mileage of over 150,000. Among the little things, we can note the attachment belts, which howl when the load on the generator or power steering increases, and timing rollers, which really do not like long periods of downtime in a humid climate. With all this, the motors are quite simple. Almost everything in them can be changed by yourself with a minimum number of proprietary devices and tools. F4R engines tolerate the installation of HBO very well, even in not very recent versions, since they have hydraulic compensators in the valve drive and good cooling. Engines show an appetite for oil mainly when they run over 150,000 kilometers and change the oil every 15,000, strictly according to the regulations. At the same time, I have seen many examples where F4R and H4M, with mileages well over 200,000, had the original piston and used almost no oil. The secret of this longevity is simple. The owners changed the oil every 10,000 kilometers or even more often, did not forget to service the VCG system and change the valve stem seals on time, and, of course, did not allow oil leaks. And they didn't pour 92-grade gasoline, since all Duster engines noticeably ring on it after warming up, and detonation sharply accelerates the wear of the piston group, liners, and catalyst. Unfortunately, despite all these advantages of engines, not all of them manage to demonstrate their outstanding resource potential. The reason is simple. The majority of these engines are poorly or very poorly maintained, the oil is changed as rarely as possible, consumables are purchased as cheaply as possible, and they do not monitor the level and quality of antifreeze. As a result, it is quite easy to encounter a dead engine in a Duster. So, despite its simplicity and reliability, I recommend not neglecting thorough diagnostics so as not to get burned when repairing or replacing the motor. Moreover, with replacement everything is much more complicated than it seems. Only the Nissan version of the H4M can be found on contract, and it is quite expensive. And any of the Duster engines are still expensive to repair. For example, the typical cost of repairing an F4R is now 150,000 rubles or more. The good old K9K of the third generation on a Russian-assembled Duster is not very common, but it is popular among people for its outstanding fuel efficiency and surprisingly good traction. You just need to remember that with low-viscosity oil, after hundreds of thousands, you can get lifted liners, especially for those who like to drive at minimum speeds and with a full load. Cracks in the cylinder head, a low-life turbine, and other probable little things of this engine do not count. It is better to remind you that in winter it is cool in a diesel Duster. The engine heats up frankly poorly if the heater is not installed. The braking system on most cars is disc brakes at the front and drums at the rear. Discs come in diameters of 269 and 280 millimeters. The difference is small, and the smaller size is reserved for pre-styling cars with 1.6 engines. 2-liter cars had 280 millimeters wheels from the very beginning, and after restyling, cars with all engines received big brakes. However, the disc is still small, and it cannot boast of thickness. 24 millimeters is a figure typical for Japanese compacts. For a relatively heavy car, the brake efficiency is very moderate, and when operating in mountainous areas, overheating of the brakes is common in cars with automatic transmission. However, in city mode there are no serious complaints about efficiency unless the ESP overheats the drives. But it's worth remembering once again that the Duster, even with a fairly powerful 2-liter engine, is not a car for racing. The service life of the pads is very moderate, and many complain that they have to be changed literally every 2 oil changes. The discs also do not last long. In such conditions, in addition to normal wear and tear, overheating and beating easily become reasons for replacement. One of the unpleasant features worth mentioning is the regular sticking of the disc mounting bolts to the hub. Their material is of very poor quality, the splines are easily torn off, and there are as many as 2 mounting bolts per wheel. The fingers of the floating caliper also require increased attention. The quality of the anthers is not very high, and when running up to 100, it is usually recommended to replace them. Even powerful versions have drums on the rear axle. Of course, there are kits for converting to disc mechanisms, but drum brakes were not chosen by chance. They allow you to maintain the effectiveness of the brakes when driving in mud, sand, water, and so on. And the Duster is regularly driven into such depths, so drums are preferable here, even though braking efficiency with them was clearly not a priority. In terms of the service life of the pads and drums, they are much ahead of the front brakes, and often with mileages of over 100,000, the rear consumables are still original. But you still have to sort out the drum mechanisms. The brake cylinders begin to leak inside, and the pins and springs of the mechanism can literally fall apart from corrosion. There are no problems with the handbrake, and if the rear brakes do not leak too much and have not fallen apart, It will hold the car confidently. You just need to lubricate the cables and change them about once every 4 to 5 years. In general, given the price of parts of less than 2,000 rubles per wheel, repairing the rear brakes will not bankrupt the owner. But it's worth checking the operation of the mechanisms before purchasing, because they sometimes service the Duster like a Zigguleaf, for example. They can easily just plug the pipe or remove the pads instead of repairing the brakes. On cars that are about 10 years old, it is already necessary to check the condition of the brake lines. Swelling and fistulas occur. But brake hoses require replacement relatively rarely. The ABS system is quite reliable. There are no serious complaints about the sensors and its operation in general. Sometimes there are problems with contact corrosion or wiring breakdowns, but these are isolated cases. Sometimes the drive rings on the front CV joints bend, but they are on sale, and this is an inexpensive problem. The front sensors of the system often break when trying to replace the hub, since the sensor in it becomes sour tightly. So if you plan to remove it, it is better to buy a new sensor in advance. The Duster's suspension is excellent, inexpensive, yet durable and durable. The valuable balance of the suspension is that it withstands off-road conditions well and ensures quite decent behavior of the car on asphalt. Structurally, all-wheel drive vehicles have McPherson struts all around and 3 levers per side at the rear, while front-wheel drive vehicles have a simple twisted beam at the rear. In most cases, up to a mileage of hundreds of thousands of kilometers, repairs to the front suspension are required only to replace the anti-roll bar struts, the shock absorber bushings, or their lubrication, and wheel bearings. The latter are frankly weak for a heavy car. Bearings also often fail due to corrosion. Their tightness is low. If you fill the hubs a little when washing or off-road, you will find rust inside. Shock absorber bushings generally do not play, but creak due to poor design and inability to handle large suspension travel, so lubrication is not the worst way to temporarily neutralize the problem. But, unfortunately, it is difficult to install bushings of a larger size and with better compression, which will not turn. Hey buddy, looking for a used car? You should pay attention to the site Carmi.pro. Carmi.pro is huge catalog of cars, engines, gearboxes, and the best part is, you can find out about breakdowns of any part of any car, absolutely free. Go on Carmi.pro and be aware of all possible malfunctions. Carmi.pro. Even in the front suspension, the ball joint boots are at risk. They are poorly protected, so when going off-road and driving through deep snow and sand, you should regularly check their condition. Closer to 100,000 mileage, those who do not brake on potholes may experience play in the silent blocks of the front lever, but most drivers can easily reach mileage of more than 150,000 without problems. The shock absorbers are rather weak and, when driving regularly on bad roads at high speed, do not guarantee even 100,000 before replacement. But with adequate urban use, they usually last up to 130 to 150,000. And you also need to remember to keep an eye on the subframe bolts. They tend to come loose due to the uneven load on it. In the rear suspension of front-wheel drive versions, the shock absorbers and their lower supports are mainly affected. Already with a mileage of just over 50,000, they may require replacement. The silent blocks of the rear beam are very reliable, and even with mileage well over 200 they can be original. However, there are plenty of cases of replacements with mileages of up to 100. Apparently, the quality is unstable, or some unaccounted factor is affecting it. All-wheel drive cars have no better shock absorbers in the rear than front-wheel drive cars and don't last much longer. The struts also have the unpleasant feature of hitting the rear arch locker with the spring. It is not installed as standard on most cars. Simple silent blocks of levers are inexpensive, and replacing them is not a problem, but their service life is difficult to predict. Some people change them after 30,000 mileage, others go through them after 150. Regular suspension overhaul due to wheel bearing failures and to replace springs also prevents us from drawing a full conclusion about the resource capabilities. Standard springs are thin and corrode easily, so owners install reinforced ones, and there are several domestic manufacturers that specialize in versions of increased strength springs. But when installing them, you will have to come to terms with the fact that the rear of the car becomes very rigid. Well, the wheel bearings in the rear do not last long. just like in the front suspension. Steering with conventional power steering is not as reliable as we would like. With runs over 150,000 kilometers, the chances of leaks and play in the rack increase greatly, but some were more lucky and had the rack replaced during the warranty period due to leaks. When buying a car, look carefully at the rack boots. If they are wet, then the chances that you will add a liter of Elfmatic per season are very high. However, this is still an acceptable quality before restyling. The slats were such that they were replaced one at a time under warranty due to leaks and squeaks. Slats with a service life of more than 150,000 began to be installed on Duster only in 2017. By the way, the manufacturer of the original rack is TRW, but there is a nuance. It comes in Turkish and Indian, and the Indian one is rumored to be better. In addition to the steering rack, problems with the power steering pressure sensor are regularly encountered. In older versions it leaks, and if it fails, the engine speed fluctuates greatly during maneuvers. The system hoses are also not an example of quality, and leaks due to hose breaks occur regularly. The service life of the CV joint is very moderate. Even with a mileage of over 50,000, cars could require replacement of the drive, including due to play in the internal tripod. However, in most cases, the cause of service life problems is the installation of non-standard tires and wheels, which increases the load on the transmission many times over. With repairs, the situation is not always simple. In the original, the part is changed only in the form of the drive assembly, and non-original ones are often not suitable in practice. The 6-speed manual transmission on the Duster is TL4, a quite successful unit with a cable drive and a maximum transmitted torque of 240 to 260 Nm. Its problems mainly include oil leaks and souring of drive cables. With high mileage, the synchronizers of the third and fourth gears wear out. Due to the peculiarities of the Duster's shift mechanism, cars with broken third gear clutches and shafts are regularly encountered. The 5-speed gearbox of the front-wheel drive versions is the JR5, well known from Logan and long localized in Togliatti. This is also a fairly successful gearbox, and its problems, in general, are the same as those of the 6-speed. If you keep an eye on the oil and change the drive cables on time, then it won't cause any trouble. Both boxes are equipped with a hydraulic clutch, which is quite reliable, despite the all-plastic construction of the main elements. The flywheels here are simple, single mass, and the clutch is reliable during urban use. Its service life greatly exceeds 100,000 kilometers. The Duster was equipped with an improved variation of the middle-aged AL4 automatic transmission with DP2/DP8 indexes. The first option is for single-wheel drive versions. The second is for all-wheel drive. In fact, the only differences between them are the gearbox and the enhanced cooling system in the all-wheel drive version. Inside the box, they are as similar as possible. Unlike DP0, the performance of the cooling system has been increased and a reinforced torque converter has been used, which does not wear out as much as in older versions of the gearbox. The design remains extremely simple and cheap to repair, and with regular oil changes at least once every 50,000 in the absence of overheating. This box already consistently serves its 150 to 200,000 mileage without suffering from pressure loss, where of the solenoid package or shaft beating. Problems with older versions do occur, but much less frequently and in cases of strict non-compliance with operating rules, for example, among those who like to torture the car off-road or among those who fundamentally do not change the oil in the automatic transmission. Other owners of cars with automatic transmission need not worry too much. If they are willing to pay for servicing the transmission, then it will last long enough and will not suddenly fail. But the dynamics and fuel consumption with a 4-speed automatic will definitely not please you. Consumption in city mode is noticeably higher than with a manual, and the dynamics in the 0 to 60 range are just as worse. Oddly enough, the bevel gearbox and even the rear axle with the rear axle drive clutch fail relatively rarely. The clutch may operate with jerks and delays if the oil in it is not changed or there are problems with the electrical connectors and the ABS system sensors fail. But almost all problems can be easily fixed. But the real problem with all-wheel drive versions is the driveshaft. Its service life in real-life off-road use of all-wheel drive is 50,000 kilometers. In city mode it is noticeably higher, but even after driving over 100, the car then usually has play or biting of the crosspieces. And the most unpleasant thing in this situation is that it is not dismountable, and there is no standard procedure for replacing the crosspieces. The standard crosspieces have dimensions of 19 by 55.7 millimeters and are installed with factory core. You can put a new crosspiece in the same fork, but the chances of marriage are very high, and these crosspieces are weak. A typical repair method from experienced garage technicians is to apply superglue or epoxy. If it is possible to make a groove for the retaining ring, then it is usually more profitable to install a larger crosspiece with a bearing diameter of 22 millimeters. These are installed on many Japanese cars. Well, or bore it for the VAZ Classic crosspieces, 23.8 by 61.3 in size, which are very common and quite reliable. You can also install larger crosspieces. Fortunately, there are plenty of popular options. But all this requires either welding new flanges with balancing or boring old crosspieces, again with balancing. As a result, the cost of repairs usually exceeds 25 to 28,000 rubles, which is quite a lot by the standards of a budget car. Well, buying a new car then is an adventure at a cost of 50,000 rubles, and in terms of service life it is unlikely to be better than the old one. The quality of paintwork on Duster is even higher than that of many Japanese, but still far from standard. The coating is thin and very vulnerable, so the appearance of bugs in specimens older than 5 years is quite expected. In the southern regions, cars with low mileage may have factory paintwork even on 10-year-old copies, but cars of this class are usually not taken care of, so the chances of success are low. The metal of all panels, except the roof, is galvanized on one side, chips on external surfaces turn red relatively slowly, and the owners, in theory, have time to eliminate the troubles. But this is only in theory. In practice, most people wait until they have to paint the entire panel or until holes appear in it. Small chips are usually not touched up. The main problem areas are the top edge of the roof, the license plate recess on the rear door, and the side door surfaces and arches, especially the front of the muscular rear arch. A lot here depends on the operating conditions, and Dusters that go off-road have obvious problems with the paintwork rubbing on the sills. Next to the plastic elements, there are a lot of scratches on all surfaces, and the lower edge of the rear door often suffers due to contact with the bumper. Cars from Moscow and St. Petersburg suffer more from corrosion of the lower part of the doors and arches due to constant exposure to salt cocktails. Also, cars from these regions often experience corrosion on the rub thresholds and places where the door seal wears off the paint. Duster produced before 2015 may already have obvious holes in the corners of the doors and under the plastic sills. But the main damage is not noticeable, especially if the car has undergone pre-sale preparation, which is typical for most offers. Dusters sell like hotcakes, and therefore resellers willingly take them in any condition, and there they use the latest technologies of deception. I would advise you not to neglect instrumental diagnostics of paintwork and never buy a Duster only based on reports. And especially not to inspect the crossover when dirty or in poor lighting. Duster must be checked from below. Largely because after off-road exploits there can be a lot of problems. The thresholds covered with plastic overlays with their very cheap and therefore vulnerable to rust fastening to the metal also have an effect. All this is visible only from below, so you need to at least look or put a camera under the bottom, well illuminate the fastening points and the edge of the threshold itself, which easily corrodes and serves as a kind of indicator of the general condition. The upper threshold fastenings are plastic clips. They are not fixed very firmly, so the holes around them corrode, especially in the middle part of the threshold, where the load is higher. There, in older specimens, a piece of the threshold often simply bends out. So if the plastic in the center wobbles with a crunch, then there is a possibility that the reason lies not in the breakage of the plastic clips, but in the corrosion of the metal at the place of their installation. The studs on the lower sill mountings simply collect dirt and rust. In the rear, near the wheel arch, dirt gets clogged under the sill. There is usually no severe corrosion there, but this is a matter of time. The seals on the lower edge of the doors hide the beginning of corrosion on the inner edge. During inspection, you need to bend them back and carefully check all fastening points and drain holes. A lot of dirt accumulates inside the door, and it is often damp there. The door simply does not withstand operating conditions in Russia, and the use of cheap body sealant also affects it. Experienced owners anti-corrosion the internal cavities every couple of years, and, apparently, this is a completely working method of saving doors. In the engine compartment, pay attention to the seams of the body pillars and the presence of bugs on the mudguards of the engine compartment. On the oldest Dusters, increased attention must be paid to the upper reinforcement of the body spar and its junction with the wing. Well, corrosion at the bottom of the bumper amplifier brackets is common, and it occurs even in relatively new cars. Moisture in the interior of the trunk is common. The seals are inexpensive, as are the interior materials. On cars before restyling with air conditioning, there was a defect in the form of a lack of seals between the stove block and the body, as a result of which condensation got under the carpets. On cars before restyling, the stove body itself often leaks. Water easily gets into the interior even if the body is not washed carefully, after which it does not want to leave. Unfortunately, any symptoms of this kind greatly increase the chances of electronic failures and underbody corrosion, so it is imperative to check for the presence of moisture. The internal seams of the body under the body panels require revision, especially in the area of the rear door opening. Weak sealing of seams and poor quality of welding of Duster before restyling can result in metal corrosion even in the upper part of the body and abundant leaks in the area of the rear lights. And the interior of the body near the rear arches and the floors near the places where the amplifiers are installed often have strange pockets of rust near the welds and corrosion at the joints. There's no point in hemming and hawing. Everything is like on a zigzag, and our assembly takes its toll. Most inexpensive Japanese cars are made and painted exactly the same way. And here they were not too lazy to spray anti-corrosive on the bottom and, in general, tried to do it, although cheaply, but for a long time. In specimens under 10 years old, most body panels are often in good condition, especially if the Duster is not from Moscow or St. Petersburg. And it's better if it was a car after restyling, when many assembly flaws were eliminated. Everything is so cool that it would seem there shouldn't be any problems. But no, the attempt to minimize the cost of all components takes its toll. The headlights sweat, and pre-restyling models suffer especially, since the glass may also develop small cracks. Headlights, which have a soft and easily overheated layer of plastic inside, do not tolerate polishing very well. Reflectors also crumble quickly, and corrector failures are not uncommon. Slightly jamming door handles need to be lubricated. The windows rattle. The power windows work with the sound of a dying mechanism from the very beginning. Windshield washer leaks, sometimes directly onto the ignition modules of gasoline engines. Adjustment of locks and hinges left much to be desired until 2015, when the factory began to do this procedure really well. True, the sound of the door closing is still somewhat reminiscent of knocking on the lid of a cardboard box with a children's metal construction set. Buttons, mirrors, washer nozzles, wipers, all this does not have a very long service life and is afraid of water, chemicals, and operation in general. Many people change their seals to Gazelle ones, and oddly enough, Gazelle ones are better. It is quite difficult to predict how long it will last, but in most cases, up to 100,000 mileage, the Duster does not cause much trouble. Hey buddy, looking for a used car? You should pay attention to the site Carmi.pro. Carmi.pro is huge catalog of cars, engines, gearboxes, and the best part is, you can find out about breakdowns of any part of any car, absolutely free. Go on Carmi.pro and be aware of all possible malfunctions. Carmi.pro. The interior of the Duster is simple, but it is not recommended to wash it with a hose. The reason was stated above. Before restyling, the interior was completely unsightly, after which it became better, but still an unprepared person experiences 12 shades of depression in it. At the same time, it is worth recognizing that in general everything here is quite convenient, although not very ergonomic. I suspect that galls have arms at waist level, and quite long ones, otherwise I cannot explain the location of many buttons, such as turning on the heated seats or the joystick for adjusting the mirrors. The wear resistance of even the all-plastic interior is not impressive. The steering wheel and panels wear out badly at ridiculous mileages of 120 to 150,000. But there are some unique ones in which, even after 300,000, everything looks like it came from the factory. There are no obvious breakdowns in the cabin, but the seats are rather weak, and one can only dream of the absence of squeaks and sound insulation. It is useless to talk about the multimedia system. It sometimes comes in the basic configuration, but the sound quality is not discussed at all. The climate is simple, but prior styling Dusters have widespread problems with the sealing of the stove body, which causes condensation to form on the floor. Condensate drain windows may not be centered relative to the floor holes or may not have seals, which is also unpleasant. But among the breakdowns, only weak radiators can be noted. Cabin and air conditioner condenser and the air conditioner clutch requires care, cleanliness, and lubrication. It often tends to make unpleasant sounds after contamination or prolonged inactivity. The situation with electrics is the same as with other body equipment. It seems that everything is simple and should work well, but it is made so cheaply that the machine simply cannot be completely problem-free. In combination with frequently wet body floors, the result is unpleasant. The list of electrical problem areas is quite voluminous, but the most widespread troubles of the problem are corrosion of the body harness connector in the left threshold and corrosion of the mounting block under the hood. In a Duster with an automatic transmission, the automatic transmission connector and the wiring to it rot. Well, many owners put a safe on the engine control unit, which is located openly for ease of assembly. Putting a new one in its place, without an immobilizer, is a matter of 1 minute. Many people turn the block over and put a protection plate on top, while others attach a full-fledged reinforced casing with shear bolts. In both cases, the wiring to the unit is damaged quite quickly. Any engine compartment harnesses become not very flexible after 3 years, and after 5 you can already see crumbling insulation and green wires. The situation with door corrugations is exactly the same, except that this causes fewer problems.